Hi there, I'm Dr. Emma DeMarco, and this is the Unmusical Podcast. Today's episode is with Chief Conductor of the Christchurch Symphony Orchestra and Principal Conductor in Residence of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, Benjamin Northey. Well, hi Ben, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. How are you going?
I'm great. It's great to be talking to you, and I'm really happy that you're doing this, Emma.
Oh, thank you so much. So if you want to introduce yourself to the podcast, maybe describe a little bit about what you do, that would be great.
Sure. So my name's Ben Northey. I've got two titled positions as a conductor. I'm a full-time professional conductor, Principal Conductor in Residence at the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, Chief Conductor of the Christchurch Symphony Orchestra in New Zealand. And the rest of the time I'm traveling around conducting Australian orchestras, New Zealand orchestras, and orchestras in the Asia Pacific region.
So when you meet someone new, perhaps that's not a musician, how do you explain yourself? How do you explain your title and what you do?
Yeah, well, the word conductor, depending on who you're talking to, often they'll wonder if, it's a bus company you work for. But thing is little understood from a general public point of view outside our classical music bubble. Yeah. It's people don't really understand what you're doing. You're waving your arms around up in front of an orchestra and how it all works. So it does take a little bit of explaining and unpacking. There's a lot of mystique about the role, and I think that's kind of part of the allure of the job in many ways. But it just shows you it's such a niche area of life, and people have no understanding or experience of what conductors actually do. So it's my job to explain myself a bit to them.
Yeah, for sure. Would you have some career highlights that stand out to you?
Oh yeah, I mean, my first ever big concert with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, which was back in 2003 at the My Music Bowl. I'll never forget that night. That was amazing. My big debut, conducting. I'd been studying for about 3.5 years up to that point, and that was my first big break, conducting Beethoven 6, and just that outdoor concert at the My Music Bowl. I've done a lot of those concerts since then, and that's always stayed with me. First time conducting London Philharmonic, I remember at Royal Festival Hall. Those things were amazing. Just, working with soloists as well, working with some of the really amazing soloists like Pinchas Zuckerman and Sophie von Otter, the singer. I remember Maxim Vengerov, the violinist. There's a lot of highlights. I mean, I could go on for ages, actually, and it's not all that international stuff either. Often it's the projects that are unique to Australia are the ones that really stick with me, like the First Nations collaborations that we do, new music projects, collaborations with non-traditional art forms, dance and comedians and circuses and all kinds of stuff. So it's just the orchestra reaching wide. That's what I like.
Yes, amazing. And one thing that I always find fascinating to ask conductors is, are you still an instrumentalist or a singer yourself? Do you still play, or are you just conducting?
I'm just conducting. I play the piano, but I don't do it professionally. And it's hard as a conductor because, I played every day for 10 years. As you know, I was a saxophonist.
Yeah.
I played every day for 10 years, or more, 15 years, I suppose, because I got into conducting quite late.
Yeah.
And I was working at a really high level. And when you get into conducting, that requires all of your attention. It's not a part-time thing. And especially when you're getting into it in your late 20s, like I was, it's 150% commitment to try and make that work.
Definitely.
And so and then the other thing is you're working with professional musicians who are playing every day.
Yeah.
And so people say, why don't you just play for fun? It's like, well, it's not fun unless you're playing really well. So,
yeah,
I mean, I kind of have these fantasies that one day I might pick up the saxophone again just for fun. But, I tried that a few times. I haven't played for years, but
oh, wow.
I picked it up recently, the soprano. And
of all of them, you picked the soprano.
Way too hard. Why would anyone keep of all saxophones, the soprano saxophone, like the hardest one to play?
Yeah, I think
I just thought I'd leave it to the professionals.
So you've obviously mentioned that you are a saxophonist, and so I have to ask, as a saxophonist myself, do you ever program works for saxophone specifically? Do you like to pull the saxophone into the orchestra? Because there's only a few pieces of repertoire.
Yeah, look, I don't actively do it, but people ask me to conduct concerts that feature the instrument is what happens. So, for
Okay.
example, later this year I'm doing a new saxophone concerto written by Matthew Heinsohn for Amy Dixon.
Yes.
I've just conducted the New Zealand premiere of a new saxophone concerto by John Sathis, New Zealand composer, with Adam Page playing. So I mean, there've been Ross Edwards wrote a saxophone concerto.
Yes.
Brett Dean's Siduri Dances was transcribed for saxophone. I mean, there's lots of works out there, and it's quite a common solo instrument now, more than it has been in the past, I think. So I understand what they're doing, and I understand, from a conductor's point of view, if you're a violin player, you understand what the soloist is doing if it's a violin concerto. It's the same kind of level of understanding.
Yes, definitely. So at this point of you mentioned in your late 20s, you decided to pursue conducting more actively. What was it that you wanted to be in front of the orchestra? What drew you to the podium?
Well, it was just a teacher who encouraged me to do it. When I was at uni in fourth year, I met a teacher called John Hopkins, who was an old man by that stage, a real legend of Australian music and great conductor. And he was running a conducting program. And I ended up, I used to do a lot of commercial arranging of music. And so he asked me to do all of the arrangements for the conducting class for these little ensembles. And I really enjoyed that. And I loved working with him. And he said, you know what, you should pursue this. You've got the skills required to do this. And I thought he was mad. I'd never considered it. I wasn't somebody who saw myself as a conductor, standing up on the podium. And he invested in me for those sort of, early 2.5, 3 years. And so that was the only reason. He believed in me to the point where I started believing in myself. And then I won a competition and got into the Sibelius Academy in Finland and studied for 4 years over there. And then I kind of started to work out a bit what I was doing,
Yeah, amazing. So you studied in Finland and then also in Stockholm, is that right?
Correct.
I feel that a lot of classical musicians are drawn to studying overseas. Do you think that that's something that's essential or was essential for you?
Well, certainly in the world of conducting at that time, it was essential. Nothing here in Australia. I was at the University of Melbourne, which was 18 months. But in terms of a conducting program that was multi-year, that was a 4-year course in Finland, and it's produced even now probably 20 of the world's top 100 conductors, country of 5 million people. Wow. So it's a real mecca of conductor training. So it was a no-brainer for me to audition to get in. I didn't think I was the highest ranked applicant that year worldwide. So, that was another kind of shot in the arm in terms of me believing in myself. Yeah. But, I think now conducting's probably a bit different, but as an instrumentalist, it's good to go away and get perspective. But I think there's more musicians who stay here and get an elite level of training. Now that we've got the Australian National Academy of Music, the conservatoriums are doing great work, Australian Youth Orchestra, all these, youth ensembles in the States. I just feel like we are a much higher level musical nation than most. And that there's heaps of musicians in the orchestras now, for example, who haven't studied overseas. And they're equally good, if not better. So, that's changed quite a lot, I think.
So with being a conductor, I always find that everyone likes to bring a certain energy or a certain perspective to the podium. And, I've worked with a few myself. What sort of energy do you like to give off to your ensembles? Or what are you hoping to bring to the podium when you work with a new orchestra?
Oh, look, I like the word joy. That's my mantra.
Okay.
I want to communicate and radiate the joy of making music. Yeah. I want it to be a positive experience for everyone, for the listeners, for the players. Yeah. I like working hard. I like bringing really high standards to rehearsals, and a commitment to being the best that we can possibly be. Just high performance. But ultimately, we have to be loving what we're doing. Otherwise, it's not going to hit the audience the way we want it to. So that would be my one word: joy.
Oh, amazing. Have there ever been times when you've had to push through to get to the joy, or you felt that
Sometimes the joy doesn't happen at all. It
Oh,
depends
no.
on the gig too. Some gigs are just not fun. I mean, they're just, they're difficult, and you might be doing music that you don't like, or it happens. I mean, we've all done those gigs, right, where we're playing something, we're kind of rolling our eyes a little bit at the same time. But you do have to push through those, and you have to understand that everybody's got a different perspective. And especially in our classical music bubble, we're talking about 0.1% of the population who even understand what orchestras are doing, and from the perspective of musicians, we have to remember the audience experience what we do in a completely different way than us. And just because we might not like a particular style of music that we're playing, that doesn't mean that it's not important to do that music, to perform that music for the audience that do love it.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's really interesting. I was chatting to my partner who's not a musician, and mentioned how many conductors actually don't get to choose the repertoire that they're conducting. They might just get called in or offered a program that's already created. How does that work for you? Do you sometimes get to choose, sometimes not? How does that work?
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends. People, when I'm putting together the season for Christchurch Symphony, for example, obviously I'm choosing my pieces. So, and it's same with Melbourne Symphony. Often they'll have a soloist in mind, where they'll call me and say, look, we've got such and such soloist, they want to play this concerto. And then they're like, what would you like to do around that? And can you suggest some pieces? And then it's a negotiation, because you can't just pick a piece every time. It's like sometimes they're doing it in that season, or they've done it recently, or they've got plans to do it with a different conductor next year. So it's this ongoing negotiation where you suggest things and you just hope that something ticks all the boxes and it works. But things like there's all kinds of projects that the orchestras want to do where they need conductors. So for example, later this year, the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra is coming out to Australia with Wynton Marsalis. And they call me up and they're like, would you like to conduct those gigs? And I'm like, absolutely. Please, can I? So, that happens a lot, where they need or a film and orchestra project or something where, it's nothing to do with you. It's just, are you available? Yes. And do you want to do it? Yeah. So, yeah, it's kind of like a bit of both.
Oh, wow. A lot of the performers that I've spoken to for this podcast talk about having to be the drivers of their own career, maybe go into producing events and things like that. How does it work for a composer? Because, a conductor. Just because I feel like maybe even as a musician myself, I don't necessarily have an insight into that world of what it's like to build your career bit by bit.
Yes, you do have to be the driver of your own career. It's exactly the same. Possibly even more so. I think, when I came back from overseas in 2007 and I started building my career here in Australia, I just conducted everything, and I started doing education concerts and sort of, graduated my way up bit by bit. And that was really good. It was good to be able to develop through the opportunities and not be too precious about waiting for the next Brahms symphony. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but I do feel like, I often will go to orchestras with ideas for programs, and why don't we do this? What about this? And that's crucial. I think that's really important, because then it's you believe in it, and that you speak a different way on the podium when you really believe in your own project or idea.
Yeah.
And you've got a different kind of passion for it. So I do think that's crucial, actually.
How do you motivate so many people on a podium? Because I think that's the other thing that non-musicians might look at a conductor and look at this person in charge of so many people and unifying a vision and getting everyone together under this one idea that you might have or that you're leading, and go, how on earth do you do that? How do you talk to everyone? How does that work for you? How do you unify the musicians?
Well, setting a high standard is really the key. I think all of the musicians want it to sound great. They all want it to be great.
Yeah.
And it's a frustrating job, as you know, sitting in an orchestra because you're a bit powerless. You feel a bit powerless, and they do really rely on the conductor to, set the working atmosphere and the working standards.
Okay.
I find that the pacing of the rehearsal is important. The things that you choose to work on, when the balance between talking and playing, not talking too much, is really crucial for orchestras because they're there to play, right?
Yeah, of course.
And just communicating efficiently, getting things done quickly. Don't waste people's time, because that's the enemy of motivation. People just switch off and they just like, oh my God, this is a nightmare. But the high standards thing, I feel like, orchestras are high performing environments, and they don't get a lot of feedback outside of the rehearsals as players. We don't do that well in orchestras at all. They do that really well in sporting clubs, for example, where you've got an ongoing feedback loop where you're developing and investing in players constantly, trying to improve them and get the best out of them. These are full-time employees, after all. But we don't do that in orchestras. And the rehearsal is the only chance that they get to sort of hear that from a conductor. And it's not always appropriate for a guest conductor to do it. But when you're a chief conductor or a titled conductor, I think that's part of your job, is to continually point out things that we can improve and work on and set the standard. And if something's not meeting the standard, you have to address it and fix it.
Yeah.
And that way the musicians understand what the expectation is. And that's also quite motivating, because you want to meet the expectation that's being set by the conductor. Some conductors just make it really fun and give great energy to the musicians. That's important as well. And the musicians will give you a lot back for that, because they appreciate it. And ultimately, remember, you're only as good as the musicians play. So in terms of inspiring them, it's at the core of what we do, because ultimately they decide how good the conductor is, and the conductor will be judged on how well or not the musicians play. So great conductors can go to one orchestra and the orchestra chooses not to play for them. Does that mean they're still a great conductor? Well, not that night.
No. Isn't that interesting, the concept of like an orchestra not wanting to play for the conductor? That seems terrifying to me. Like, if I was on the podium, has that ever happened to you, or have you seen it happen? Have you got any stories to share?
Every orchestra's different. And there might be a project that, the musicians don't enjoy or something like that. And that's different though. If you've offended the members of the orchestra, or, like, this happens where conductors are too aggressive, or they, they say something insensitive or rude and are disrespectful. Especially young conductors get into this trap sometimes, trying to look like they're really strong and, know what they're doing. And orchestras just decide, I'm not going to give you everything. Why would I? So it happens all the time. And that's, that's kind of important, because the musicians need conductors they want to play for.
Yeah.
They need to respect them. They need to believe in them. And if they don't, well, better off getting a different person.
So you mentioned how you have 2 titled positions, and you obviously work with many other orchestras. You're going around the world at the moment. Are you doing lots of international work, or are you based mostly in Australia and New Zealand?
Yeah. I travel to Asia quite a lot. So I've got young children. I've never wanted to be away for months at a time in Europe and America. So I've deliberately avoided pursuing that career path.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that I can work close to home. I'm usually only 3-hour flight from home, or if I go to Hong Kong or Japan or whatever, it's not as crazy as going to Europe, it feels like. So
Yeah.
the time zones are the same, and it's hard balancing that family and work life. Emma, it's not a easy thing for any artist to do, and it's kind of the price we pay, to be honest. But I've got friends who go away for months, and I just can't do it. I can't do it to my family.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It is the price we pay, and it's part of just being in the industry, but also building a career is having these opportunities in lots of different places. Do you envision maybe with digital concert halls and changing things, do you ever envision that you might be able to be a conductor in one city, or will conductors always need to be moving around quite a bit?
It's a good question. I think the model at the moment is very much a variety of conductors. In the old days, the chief conductors, they would conduct a lot of the season.
Yeah.
And they were really hands-on with the running of the organizations that they were conducting. That's not really the case anymore. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. But that's just how it is. We've got this kind of, this culture of traveling people in and out, flying in, flying out, guests, just variety. And I suppose the audience is probably like that too, having a variety of people. So I'm lucky. I'm one of the very few people in the world who lives in the city of their home orchestra where they've got a title position. That's very unusual.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful for that. And I don't take that for granted.
So can't really avoid talking about the pandemic and how it's changed our industry. We're obviously a few years down the line now, but well, for starters, how did 2020 go for you? What did that look like?
Yeah, well, I only just made it out of New Zealand that just the day before the borders closed. So I had a concert on the Saturday, flew home on the Sunday, and the borders closed Sunday night.
Oh my goodness.
So I was lucky to get home for a start. And then, 2020 was initially kind of like, oh, wow, this is nice to have a break because, I'd been traveling so much and I'm away 7 months of the year, right? So for the family, it was really lovely and we were all together, but I wasn't earning any money. So if I'm not working, I'm not earning. I'm not a salaried employee of any organization. I'm a freelance musician. And that's how conductors work. We're contractors. We're not salaried employees. And so if you can't do the gigs, you're not earning any money. So that was the biggest thing for me, was just going from, earning a living to nothing, to just nothing. And so big adjustment, going onto the JobKeeper package. But the big thing I remember thinking was, how can I sort of help through this period for the sector? And so I did a lot of radio. I remember I was quite kind of present with content and trying to remain connected to our audiences. I mean, media became the way we did things, right? It was, as you were saying, the online things. We had projects with universities where it was Zoom orchestras and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, but that was brutal. And then for the orchestra, just a complete shutdown. And every orchestra coped with that differently depending on where they were. Some orchestras had an easy run with lockdowns and whatnot, but it hit Melbourne very hard. So we're still bouncing back, and we haven't recovered to pre-COVID levels yet.
So you haven't noticed sort of audiences back the way they were yet, or maybe they have? How have you seen?
No, we're not back to where we were. It depends what kind of projects. Like for our commercial projects, films, the really big popular things. But just, it's still a challenge. I think a lot of people, we broke the habit here in Melbourne. And it's not just here. I think it's many cities around the world. People just don't feel as comfortable going out anymore. And the world's changed. People are staying home. They're working from home. They're not in the city on the level that they used to be.
Yeah.
And, so yes, we're still waiting for that pre-COVID level of audience to come back.
One thing I was curious about, and I'm not sure what your answer to this will be, but, with the pandemic, it felt like a lot of instrumentalists and singers just naturally went online with either live streamed things or pre-recorded things. But how does a conductor do that? How do you go online? You did some media appearances, but can't quite conduct no one. How does it work? What is that like?
Well, the projects I did were these kind of online orchestras, all those dreadful tiled screens with musicians in boxes. And I actually did a couple of those for universities where people would send in their recordings and then I would collate everything. And because I can sort of do music technology as well, they were they were the closest thing we could get to live performance. So
Yeah.
I think I did about 3 or 4 of those. But the role of the conductor is not just music making. The role of the conductor is public facing, it's advocacy, and it's messaging. And so I and leadership, it's a leadership position. And so I sort of found myself thinking about that responsibility of trying to advocate and support my colleagues and the sector as we were really struggling, and and lobbying for support. And we were all bailed out and got government bailouts, and we had to argue our case for those things. That wasn't an easy scenario. And I think the entire classical music sector particularly, but all the arts, did really well effectively lobbying for that support.
Yeah, amazing. One thing that I'll bring up here, because you mentioned media and lobbying, is I was very surprised one day when I was flicking through the Mamma Mia news website, which is like, it's a news and a women's lifestyle website, and there's an article by Ben Northey all about the orchestra. How did that come about, you writing articles advocating for the industry?
Yeah, well, look, I've always thought it's important for us to be visible in what I describe as normal people's lives. In other words, not the classical musical bubble that we live in. And this, our perspective is just so minute and narrow that it's really important for us to remember, if we want to argue that we are important in society and we are relevant and we are worth supporting, and we need to make a contribution, and we need to be visible. We need people to see us doing what we do. And they don't all come to the concert hall. I'm sorry to disappoint everybody. So Australia's got a real issue around having high profile musicians, classical musicians particularly, having the opportunity to be in the media. We don't have many people who have the platform to be able to do that. We haven't made those platforms. We're terrible at it here in Australia. And so it's just, you've got to do it. If I'm in a position where somebody wants to publish an article, I'll write it for sure, and I don't know even how that came about. Often the orchestras are looking for, opportunities for stories and interviews, and I just think it's crucial. I've got a regular spot here on ABC Melbourne where we talk about classical music, and I do all kinds of media appearances and guest talks, and we have to do it. We just can't avoid. It's part of our job, as far as I see. It's just important. We got to be evangelists for music.
That's a fun way of putting it. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So you've obviously written words and you've written music as well. I saw you've had some composition projects. So do you consider yourself are you a slashy as well? Are you a conductor, writer, composer?
No.
More of a dabbler?
I'm a conductor. Yeah. And anything else I do is just like hobby level, Okay. I mean, you have to think about what you couldn't live without. So I could easily live without composing. I mean, I do write every now and again something, but that's not because I have to. It's just usually because there's a project. Composers have to write. They have to do it. It's like part of who they are. I have to conduct, like I'm addicted to performing. That's my whole meaning of my working life, at least, and my creative outlet. Writing's not that for me. I love writing, but it's not like I have to do it. So it's finding what you have to do. That's the message for young people as well, I think. If you can't imagine your life not playing music, don't do it.
Do you work with a lot of young musicians or young conductors particularly?
Yeah, I do. I don't really teach privately, but I do workshops for various things, and I do youth orchestra projects. So, on the weekend, I was in Albury doing a player link workshop with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra and young players from New South Wales. Actually, you've got me at a time where I'm conducting 2 youth orchestras back to back. So I'm going to conduct Sydney Youth Orchestra next week And then West Australian Youth Orchestra the week after that. I'm doing the Melbourne Youth Music Summer School in January next year. So I usually do sort of 2 or 3 of those youth projects a year.
Yeah.
But that's crucial. It's all part of the ecosystem. So in Australia, we've got an ecosystem that includes preschool music, primary school music making, secondary school, obviously, community groups, youth groups, tertiary level. And it all feeds into it, to what we celebrate about being a musical nation.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of coherent strategy because we're spread out and we're divided into these states, and everyone does it a bit differently. But ultimately, we have to think of it as one thing. And those of us who are lucky enough to be professional musicians, when we have the chance to inspire the next generation, you have to grab it with both hands.
Do you think you were always meant to be a professional musician and a conductor?
Well, definitely, I wasn't going to do anything else except be a musician. From about the age of 16, I decided, that was it. And there was never an option, really. I don't think I was good enough at anything else to do anything else. And I'd fully commit. When you're at school and all you want to do is play music and you just like everything else is a complete waste of time. That was me. So I was all in from an early age. The conducting thing was unexpected. And I think, I've had such an unconventional pathway to the podium that, that was a surprise. I didn't really think that was possible, but it also shows you there's no one path in your life. You make your own path, and it's different for everybody, and you just never know until you try. Like possibilities weird like that. We don't know what the pages of the future hold. We have to write them, and sometimes it happens, and you do something that you didn't think was possible. Yeah. So it's a good lesson.
So I'd love to talk a little bit more about sort of how you see the future of the classical music industry and where you think we're going. What does that look like from a conductor's perspective in terms of planning for the future in Australia?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We are a sort of an art form that's based on tradition and the kind of way things have been done for a long period of time. However, the changes in the last even 10 years are kind of incredible in the way that we present concerts and the kind of music that we play. I think that's going to be the biggest challenge from my perspective because, I think about the impact of what we do on audiences.
Yeah.
Arts organizations that are more perhaps or less encumbered by tradition have really revamped the way that they present their concerts. So technology is a bigger part of what they do. And audiences have now got an expectation of a certain level of presentation that kind of sit and play doesn't always meet. So I think we have to, I think we do have to look at the experience from the audience's perspective and see what it is that we can do better. For example, everybody says it's great when somebody on the stage talks to them and invites them into the experience, and that's a simple thing to do, but it just shows you the invisible barrier that does exist between an orchestra and the audience because of the formality and the weight of tradition of the experience. People feel like there's a wall there.
Yeah.
So we have to break that down. So the conductor can be really important in that, especially speaking to the audience. But I would go further. I mean, I imagine for piano concertos, having a visual component where you've got the keyboard projected onto the screen above the orchestra and you can actually see the fingers of the pianist while they're playing would make that experience much, much more interesting for the audience. There's all kinds of stuff that we could do with visuals without taking away from the listening experience, which is obviously what it's all about. But so, yeah, from my point of view, I just feel like we need to continually evolve. It's really important that we are evolving and not getting left behind by other art forms that are being perhaps more progressive than we are. And I think conductors have a role to play in advocating for those things and leading making the argument for those things.
I mean, I've seen a huge change in how how often conductors speak to the audiences now, and also how they present. I think maybe a few years ago, I would see conductors just announcing or maybe giving, oh, this piece you might hear this or you might hear that. Very quick, very brief, very music focused, still quite formal, to now having a joke, having a laugh, making a comment about, I remember a conductor who made a comment about wearing tails and, was having a little joke with the audience. It feels like there's been a massive shift for many conductors in terms of bringing the audience into their world and into their space during the concert. Do you feel the same or different, or what have you seen?
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's important. The whole formality is the enemy. So the pretension, the tails, I mean, it's just ridiculous. The last sort of little corner of the world that would think to wear tails and dress up like drink waiters. Like, it's so ridiculous. And every time we do that, we gift the high ground in terms of evolution and development to the like things like the Australian Chamber Orchestra. I know Richard Tognetti's talked about this. Like, the best gift the big orchestras give because it makes us look so innovative and cool just by putting a shirt on and looking contemporary. So, I just feel like we think about the classical music concert. You can still be respectful of it whilst making it more approachable and more accessible and less full of itself. Like it's not about that. It's about connection. It's about connection. And we have to reach out to an audience that aren't going to be intimidated when they walk into the concert hall for the first time. Because if you want to build an audience, you have to build it with people who've never been before. That's the only way you can build an audience, right? They have to be the ones who come along and go, wow, I want to come again, and I'm going to bring my mum, or I'm going to bring my kid, or I'm going to bring my friend. And that's how you build audience. And so, we have to be the most accessible, welcoming organizations from the stage, and the conductor can help with that.
Yeah. If you had the pick, what would you have the orchestra wearing?
Oh, look, I mean, just probably smart black, I suppose. I mean, it depends on the concert. I mean, we're in a world where non-binary gender is a thing, and so having, like, there's rules in the orchestras for like lengths of dresses, and I mean, it's there for a reason.
It's still split male and female dress for the orchestra,
Well, not for every orchestra.
Really? Okay.
Not for every orchestra. So New York Philharmonic aren't like that. Yeah, heaps of orchestras have moved. Yeah, heaps of them. And in our orchestra in Christchurch, we don't prescribe. So women can wear tails if they want.
Yeah.
Men can wear dresses. People can express themselves according to their identity, and so we want people to express themselves musically, and I think it's okay for them to express themselves visually as well in terms of what they wear. Like, I just don't see the problem. So I would like to see an orchestra wearing sort of contemporary, really smart kind of black outfits with a splash of color or something. I mean,
yeah, could be linked to the program somehow.
Yeah, well, that's it. If it's a more relaxed thing, they could. I mean, orchestras dress up quite often as well for certain film and orchestra projects or computer game music projects or education things. I mean, that happens. But I think it's the 21st century, so maybe the tails can stay in the cupboard.
Yes, we can do it slightly differently, can't we? So we're going to close out today with a couple of questions that I've been asking everybody, and I'm very, very excited for your answers. So the first is, what advice do you have for young people that are looking to get into the classical music industry, especially post-pandemic?
Yeah, so I feel like that's been a pathway that's been interrupted by the pandemic, and a lot of people have gone and done other things instead of pursuing their career. My number one piece of advice for young musicians is that it's not about what you're able to do on your instrument as a young player. It's about what you want to be able to do. So the development of artistic taste and in your mind where you want to be as a musician, as an artist, is more important than your technical capability as it evolves, because it takes time. And the best musicians are the ones that have the most developed taste. And they just, so their taste and their goal is here. Their development is, on a lower level, and they just work at their instrument to raise that up to where they want to get to. So you can develop your artistic taste alongside your playing ability by having opinions, by reading books, by listening to heaps and heaps of music, by going to concerts, by doing all the artsy things, go to the theatre, go to the art gallery, like soak in art and work out who you are as an artist. What are your likes and dislikes? So I think that's a key. I wish someone had told me that when I was younger, because I just played and I didn't think about any of that stuff. And then the other thing is, just remembering, like, play music for the love, but only be a professional musician if you can't imagine not doing it. That's the key.
Yeah. I think that's an important one. I feel that sometimes people do enjoy music at school and they pursue a tertiary degree because what else? Okay, I'll give it a try. Whereas I think you've really touched on an important point there, which is you have to want this. You have to be so excited by the prospect of just playing music.
Well, look, being realistic, it's highly competitive, as we know. It's brutally hard financially. So, the orchestras are jobs with salaries, but they're very few and far between in the music business, almost non-existent. The average wage for freelance musicians is like, $25,000 a year. It's just ridiculous. So you have to be teaching, you have to be doing other things, and attacking things from a broad front. You might even need a second job. So your richness has to come from the music. That's the richness. And you might make it big and, write a hit song and get rich. Like, good on you. But, you can't bank on that. You have to be getting your richness from actually doing it. That's why you do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, and one last question. This was apparently the tricky one. If you had your time all over again, would you do it all the same, or would you change things? How would it go for you?
Well, it's easy to look back with 2020 hindsight. I definitely would have practiced the piano and played the piano way more when I was younger.
Okay.
Like, I just did not take that seriously enough at all. That was such a mistake.
Yeah.
Looking back at it, that was the first instrument I ever learned, and Mum was a really good pianist, and I've always played, but not really properly.
Okay.
And I didn't practice, and I hated it and hated the practice. And now it's my favorite instrument.
Okay.
And I'm really frustrated that I can't play it better. Yeah, I'm really frustrated. And so that's the one thing I would change. I would keep everything else, the breadth of experience and the different musical kind of experiences and worlds that I've lived in and worked in.
Yeah.
But definitely I'd love to be able to. Oh, please. I wonder if it's too late. Yeah, I think it is, unfortunately.
I think you probably just need a whole heap of time, which wouldn't necessarily be something you have a lot of at the moment, to get piano skills going.
It's a good point. That's a good point. I've got my piano in my studio, like at my desk, and I do play it regularly, and I use it as a study tool and all that kind of stuff. But I just sort of wish I could play like a concerto with an orchestra, or like, it'd just be amazing to be that good.
Oh,
It's such an incredible instrument. I just love it. Like, I really love the piano.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
well.
That's the only thing. Everyone's got a different path, haven't they?
Yeah.
They all have, and if I changed one thing, it might not have worked out the same.
It's always fascinating to hear people say, they feel they had an unconventional path, but I think that everyone sometimes feels that they have an unconventional path. I don't think there is one way anymore to get to where we are.
I totally agree. And it's important to embrace that and, embrace the rocky ride of it all. Like it sort of knocks you around and it makes you who you are. That's really important.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Ben, thank you so much for coming on to our podcast today. It's been absolutely lovely to speak with you. Any big projects coming up next? What's new for you?
Yeah, look, I've got a lot of things going on. These two youth orchestra projects with Sydney Youth Orchestra, West Australian Youth Orchestra, the Jazz at Lincoln Centre concerts that are happening later in the year in Melbourne and Sydney are going to be amazing. I've got all my concerts in Christchurch between now and the end of the year. And then, there's a massive one happening at the end of November with Brian Cox, the astrophysicist, who's coming out to do 4 concerts at the Opera House with Sydney Symphony about like the meaning of the universe and like with images from the Webb telescope and all this kind of stuff. And we're putting classical music to that and putting a concert together. So that's going to be huge. And I think they're already nearly sold out. But so there's lots of exciting things, lots of exciting projects to look forward to.
Oh, that sounds incredible. And hopefully people listening will be able to catch you at one of those, either in Australia or New Zealand. Thank you so much.
Great to talk to you, Emma. All the best.